All right, let's do this. You are watching the Chad and Cheese podcast. I'm your co-host, Joel Cheeseman. Joined as always, Chad Sowash is in the house. And today we are talking to Madeline Laurano, founder at Aptitude Research, and Torin Ellis, principal at the Torin Ellis Brand. Guys, welcome to HR's Most Dangerous Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here. For those of our listeners, viewers that don't know you, which would be odd, give us the elevator pitch on what you do and who you are, starting with Madeline.
Sure. So thanks for having me back on the show. I think it's 3 or 4 now, right? Maybe
more than
a couple more and you get a velvet jacket.
Torin's
almost there.
Yeah.
She's smoking, but she's going to get the velvet robe.
I love it. So I'm an analyst. So I do research on HR technology, advisory on HR technology, and I founded a company called Aptitude Research about 10 years ago.
Awesome. And a consultant, advisor, coach, speaker, all things diversity and inclusion.
Okay. Well, you have some research that has come out. What is it, and what was the genesis to actually jump into this research?
Yes, I'll jump on that. The genesis of such was we know that there's so much conversation and chatter around the negative impact of artificial intelligence. And what Madeline and I wanted to do was to approach it from a more positive standpoint. What we feel and we absolutely believe is that AI is a tool that can provide efficiency, efficacy in the business. But we wanted to make sure that we hit some of the positive aspects of AI in our initial research. And then later in 2025, we'll explore some of the danger spots, some of the challenge spots that currently exist.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I think the conversation and the evolution of AI has changed a lot. Like it's even gone from being an HR conversation to now a board level conversation at a lot of companies. And there's, work councils, there's ethics committees, and companies are very interested in AI. And at the same time, there's this concern that it's going to introduce bias into the process. And we know humans have bias. Yes. We know, especially in talent acquisition, recruiters are coming in with bias. Hiring managers are coming in with their own bias. AI gives more of an even playing field, and it's allowing, us to scale and give everyone fair opportunity, but there's still concerns, and they're valid concerns. Yeah. So we really want to kind of pick apart, and that's what the goal of the research was, and to look at the inputs of AI and then the outputs.
Let's talk about the scale of that. Yeah. Let's talk about the scale, because the thing is humans are biased, and there's bias in the system already. You talk about scale. It's going to scale efficiency, but it's also going to scale bias. So how do we, and what have you seen in the research or your conversations, how are we going to be able to keep that bias and tamp that bias down?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that was interesting for us, we did a focus group, and there was a participant in the focus group who said, when you use the word reducing bias, it suggests that bias is already there.
Yeah.
That was their position.
Yeah.
And the person said, I don't want to assume that bias is already present. Cool. Someone else in the research said, no, bias is absolutely present.
Yeah.
And let's make sure that we approach it with that concept. And it's not a bad thing that it exists in all of us. You just need to recognize that it exists, and we need to do things intentionally to prevent it. So to your point, or to your question, what we have to do is make sure that as we are looking at implementation of new technologies in organizations, who's making that decision? Is it just technologists that are at the table making that decision? Is it the user group that's at the table? Are participants contributing to the conversation that may be negatively impacted, if you will? So I think the composition of how the decisions are being made is extremely important. I think, to Madeline's point, it's necessary that we keep it at a board level, or that we have it at every level inside of the organization, that folks are not assuming that AI is not something that's going to impact the way that they work, the way that they deploy solutions, the way that they develop strategy, the way that they look at organizational redesign. Every single level value point in the organization should have some sort of an ethical or configuration team that's evaluating new technologies that's coming into the organization.
Quickly tell me about the survey group, the focus group. Who was it? Big companies? How many people? Give us a sense of who you talked to.
Yeah, so we're close to 450 responses for the survey, which is a great response. And I'll start out before I get into the demographics. we do a lot of surveys a year, and you know this because we've, talked about lots of the research that we've done. We went from doing about 3 surveys before the pandemic to now we do 7 to 8 surveys, which is a lot. Typically, it takes about 2 weeks to get using, our various partners, using different media companies to help us get responses. It takes about 2 weeks to get a good sample. This was interesting because we launched the survey. I told Torin this, and I said 24 hours, and we're at 400. So we see this topic.
There's an appetite.
There's an appetite, and we see the topic of DE&I being less of a priority. And we talk about this in our research, and he's saying, what's going on here? Why is this happening? Torin and I have had lots of conversations around this. And then we launch a survey specifically around this topic and the use of AI in this topic. And we see responses in 24 hours.
Wow.
To the appetite piece, I think it's interesting because we have talked to practitioners here that are thinking strategically, and that we're always talking about having that seat at the table. We've actually talked to practitioners that are now saying our seat is warm at the table because we've actually started to roll out automation and in AI and whatnot that shows that we're saving these hours, we're saving this money, we're getting people into vital positions faster.
Yeah.
And now what you're saying, which adds on top of that, and that's awesome, is being able to understand whether it's injecting bias into the process or not. So you're already in a space which is, it's a hot topic, right? It's AI. But then you start to talk about, okay, wait a minute, now is it going to scale the bias? Well, obviously people care, and that's awesome.
They do care. And I want to go back to something when you said practitioners feeling like they're important. I think about a report that Josh Burson put out earlier this year. And one of the things that he said in that report, it was around April or May of 2024. One of the things that in that report he said is when he gets behind closed doors with HR practitioners, with TA practitioners, they don't feel valued inside of the organization. So I get it. It depends on what data or research we're reading will tell a different story. The point being, we need to treat everyone in the organization as if they do bring value and importance. I think Madeline would probably agree, but 2 of the spikes that we saw, which were alarming for us, number 1, people are not implementing AI because they feel like it will introduce bias, what we've said. Number 2, this one, it caused me pause for a moment, but we're not implementing we're not implementing AI because we feel like it will replace us.
Yeah.
So they're afraid to make a decision that's good for business because they don't understand how they are going to remain a part of the equation. And this goes to one of the reasons why we did this, because I want to make sure that organizations understand how important it is to have trust amongst your stakeholders. You got to have trust amongst your stakeholders. If we make this decision, this investment in new technology, what are we going to do to reskill you, upskill you, reposition you in the organization so that you could continue to drive value for us, that we're not making decisions that would prevent our organization from catapulting forward because we're afraid of that implementation. So I think that we as leaders or leaders in organizations, Joel, have to do a far better job of nurturing and embedding that trust amongst their stakeholders. And the last thing that I'll say, which is the reason why D&I is important. To me, it's about how do you deploy diversity and inclusion efforts in a way in an organization that includes everyone and gets them to understand that as stakeholders, you are our first priority. Shareholders are our second.
And that was Madeline Laurano, founder at Aptitude Research, and Torin Ellis, the principal at the Torin Ellis Brand. Guys, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us on.
Appreciate you.